Good morning, everybody. Welcome. I'm just going to wait a few more minutes while people join. So we'll probably get started in about 2 minutes. All right. Good morning, everyone. Just a quick mic check. A thumbs up if you can hear me okay. All right. Awesome. Thank you. All right. It's 9:32 by my clock, so I think we'll get started. We have plenty to talk about and cover, so we'll get going. Welcome to Education, Training in the Workforce, Data Tools for Research and Career Exploration. I am Carson Gorecki. I am the regional analyst, regional labor market analyst with the Department of Employment and Economic Development, the state agency for economic and workforce development. I work in the Labor Market Information Office, and we're going to cover a bunch of our data and tools and other organizations' data and tools that interface with the workforce system, education and training systems, and the transitions in between. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping things. This is being recorded, so just so you know that, if you want to turn off your camera or anything like that, feel free to. If you're not speaking, I ask that you mute your microphone if you can. I'll address questions at a couple points throughout, so feel free to put the questions in the chat when you have them, and then I'll address them at a couple points when we take a break or two in the session. And yeah, I'll post the meeting recording afterward. We typically put them on YouTube and then send out the links to folks so you can revisit it if there's something that I went over and you want to take another look at it. So with that, thank you very much for joining, and let's get started. What are we doing today? Going to give you a brief introduction. I already talked about DEED, labor market information concepts, a brief labor market update. I like to do that with all my presentations. It's just a good way to level set as well as show some of the data off that we use, show it in action. I'll demonstrate a little bit more on how LMI, labor market information, can be utilized specifically in education and training and workforce interface in the transitions. That's what we're going to be focusing on today. I saw through the registrations that we have a really good mix and representation, diverse organizations being represented, anything from schools, cities, workforce development boards, job counselors, career counselors, private businesses, and a little bit of everything in between. So that's great. And that kind of shows how LMI stretches and can be used across many organizations. I'll walk through and demonstrate the tools. So that'll be the meat of the session. I'm going to focus on a few of the most useful tools when it comes to that transition and connection between workforce, education, and training. I'll come at it from a couple different angles. I'll start from the career exploration vantage point. So if you're a career explorer, assisting career explorers, what are some tools that can help you with that? And then I'll come at it from a bit of the different direction, more on the research, strategic planning, organizational planning perspective. So it'll be interesting to see how each of those pieces are relevant to your specific business needs. I just listed a couple of tools here, but we'll dive into more detail. And then at the end, because I almost invariably put in too much content to cover it in the time I allot. I'll stick around to answer any more questions and to dive into any more things in detail if folks have time and want to stick around. First off, what is DEED? We are the Department of Employment and Economic Development. I mentioned this earlier, but economic development and workforce development. You break it down, distill it to its most basic pieces. We help individual job seekers find jobs, skill up, connect with training and resources. And at the same time, we help businesses and other organizations connect with resources to expand their workforce, hire, relocate, etc. We help individuals and businesses and organizations succeed. What is labor market information's role in that mission? We help give all of the best information available so that folks can make those decisions for themselves to succeed. So labor market information probably most commonly is known with the jobs numbers and unemployment rates that are produced every month. That's pieces of what we are mandated to report through the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So each state has their own LMI office. But in addition to just jobs numbers and unemployment rates and labor force statistics, we offer a whole array of other data, some of which we're going to highlight today. So information about occupations in demand, detailed wage information, employment projections, anything that those people I highlighted earlier can use to make sound decisions. Chances are that we offer it through the Labor Market Information Office. Some of the data tools or labor market tools, we have about 24 on our website. They come from both surveys, so survey-based data where we reach out, or the Bureau of Labor Statistics reach out and calls, say, households and ask them, how many people in your household, are you working, are you not working? If you're not working, how long have you looked for work, things like that. But we also have census and administrative data sources. So a great example of that is unemployment insurance claims. So when a business is paying into the unemployment insurance program, which covers about 95% of jobs in the state, they also submit information about their workers, their employees, about how much they're getting paid and what industry they're in. So from that, we can create really detailed wage and employment data by industry. So that's quarterly census of employment and wages. Same thing for quarterly employment demographics, which is industry demographic data, which is also super helpful. And then for today, graduate employment outcomes, which we'll dive into a lot, which is, in my opinion, one of the most overlooked and underappreciated tools that we offer. What do we do with these data? We do a lot of research and writing. So Employment Trends is our quarterly publication. Employment Review is our monthly publication. I write a blog every month on a topic of interest, a short 500, 600 word blog for Northeast Minnesota. We also do reports and profiles, so just like data profiles, which can serve as menus to all the different information we offer. We do presentations to workforce development boards, economic development agencies, chambers of commerce. I present to high school classes in career exploration. We collaborate with stakeholders. A lot of times that'll be the workforce development boards and economic development agencies, but it can be anybody. I answer specific data requests. So if you are trying to answer a very specific question that you're having trouble finding the data or answer to, us regional analysts are great resources to do that. And we really enjoy answering those questions. And then we create new tools, several of which I'm going to show you today. Our data come from all different types of sources. We collect it ourselves. We also get it from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, other federal partners, and state partners. The Minnesota Department of Education is a big one that we'll highlight today, as well as the National Center for Education Statistics. I just throw this up. Different data have different geographic levels and detail. Just to familiarize yourself, planning areas or planning regions is a common one that we have across a lot of our tools in the upper right, economic development regions as well. It's super handy for me in Northeast Minnesota because my planning region, Northeast Minnesota, is the same thing as Economic Development Region 3. It's not the case for a lot of my counterparts who have to piece together EDRs to get their planning regions. So I'm blessed up here. Metropolitan statistical areas is another common one, as well as counties and workforce service areas or development areas. Okay, so starting off from the job seeker perspective, how can they use labor market information? I view labor market information as being crucial to those transition points. For example, if you're about to graduate from high school and you want to decide what you want to do next, whether you want to, pursue further education or training or start working right away, labor market information can be really important in those types of decisions. So career exploration, comparison, and planning for those folks that are doing that. Wages. Wages is a big thing. You want to know what a job typically pays. And when you look at a bunch of job postings, you may see some things and have a perception of what the going rate is. But we have statistically sound information on over 800 occupations and what typical median wages are, but also 10th, 25th, 75th, 90th percentile wages. So a really good resource to do comparisons on wages. Researching your education and training options. So say you decided you do want to pursue this occupation, but it requires some level of education or training. You can compare those via a lot of our tools and other information that's available. And then reality checks. That kind of includes everything above, but you have a perception. We have the data that has been checked and verified, so you can check that against your perceptions, and oftentimes there's a difference. What about the rest of us? So coming from the other perspectives, research is a big one. I mentioned that we do that in our office, but a lot of other folks use labor market information or socioeconomic data to do a lot of research. Some examples of that can be knowing your regional workforce, your industry workforce, industry or occupational trends, or different factors impacting demand for different types of jobs or different industries. Strategic planning. So that's big. Let's say you're working for an educational institution. You want to know what programs are having success with outcomes afterward. I know a lot of the post-graduation surveys have pretty low response rates and pretty scattershot results. We have administrative data that can show outcomes by detailed educational program and institution, so that can be really helpful to see how your graduates or how the graduates of certain programs are faring. Grant writing, oh, I skipped wages. Wages from this perspective too. So say you're an employer and you want to set competitive wages, you can use it the same way, just from the kind of the opposite direction as job seekers. Grant writing and management. Oftentimes grants will request kind of a narrative or something that's detailing your need for a specific grant. Socioeconomic data, it often is what you use to answer those questions and demonstrate need. Workforce development, a lot of workforce development programs require specific occupational demand, wage, projection thresholds. So labor market information is often required to support different workforce development objectives. Job counselors here will know that. Economic development, if you're trying to attract an employer, you show you've got the workforce, what that workforce looks like, et cetera. And then reality checks, again, it's just kind of like the summary of it is you've got a perception, we can provide the reality. All right, I'm going to stop here, pause for any questions on what I covered so far on like what LMI can do and offer. So if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. Otherwise, we'll do a quick labor market update. Right. Seeing no questions so far, we shall go. And I appreciate that my memes are probably getting a little bit dusty and old at this point, so I'll have to update those. But I need a high schooler or somebody that's a little more connected to memes to help me out with that. Okay, so what's going on in the statewide labor market? I started out pretty broad. So the labor force, which is defined as people that are either employed or unemployed and looking for work actively. So if you're either working or looking for work, you're deemed to be in the labor force. So the statewide labor force has been growing pretty consistently since the 70s. We had a dip in the COVID pandemic, but we are now larger than we were before the pandemic, so that's good. But at the same time, you see that blue line has been heading the opposite direction. That's our labor force participation rate. So that's the share of the people that are 16 plus non-institutionalized, so not in a prison, for example, that are either working or looking for work. And that has gone down largely due to an aging population. You get over 65 and your likelihood of being in the labor force drops quite a bit. And we have a much higher share of our population that is in that cohort. So since 2000, we've seen increased retirements of that baby boom generation, and as a result, decreased labor force participation. That accelerated during the pandemic. So you can see that we had an even faster drop then. I will say though that 68.1% where we are in 2024 is still top 10 US states in terms of labor force participation. So we still have pretty high labor force participation, and that is that's an upper Midwest phenomenon. More recently, looking at, again, labor force, that's that blue line. You can see by month how it's changed over the pandemic period. So 2019 through, I think March is the most recent data we have. Labor force slowly recovering. Employment, that's the number of employed, that's that orange line. And then the unemployment rate is the gray bar. So you can see the unemployment rate dropped quite low following the peak of pandemic times, down to as low as 2.3%, which is historically low. We are still quite low if you compare to pre-pandemic times at 3.1%, but that is has been growing slightly the last couple of months. There's a question in the chat that says labor force participation is full-time. It is not necessarily full-time, no. So you could be working just a few hours a week and you'll be deemed to be participating in the labor force. So good question. Yep, there's people in there that we can define as working, less than they would like to for economic reasons. So maybe they don't have childcare or housing. That if they did have that, they could work more. So they would still be counted in the labor force, but yes, that is an important kind of detail there as well. We have different spatial patterns of unemployment throughout the state. You see the northern half of the state tends to have higher unemployment, especially in certain seasons. Oh, okay. You still hear me? It told me I just disconnected. I get a thumbs up if you can hear me okay still. Oh, I'm back. Okay. I don't know how much you missed, so apologies for that. My headphones just decided to disconnect. I was talking about spatial differences in unemployment rates across the state. So you can see that northern Minnesota tends to have higher unemployment rates. That's a seasonal phenomenon as well. There's more seasonal work in northern Minnesota. Think about tourism, mining, logging, etc. But you can see that not seasonally adjusted, the unemployment rate was 3.9%, which is still quite low. In terms of employment, it continues to be pretty resilient in the state. We've seen this in national reports as well. Over the year, total jobs grew 1.3%, the private sector 1.2% over the year. And that, it took 42 months of recovery for us to reach where we were pre-pandemic. So it didn't happen overnight. And you see, but the job losses almost did overnight. You see that big drop in April of 2020. So it took us 42 months to get back what we lost essentially in 3 months. Earnings continue to outpace inflation, which is good news. So 3.9% was in earnings growth over the year into March, and that's compared to 2.4% inflation. This chart is super important. It kind of encapsulates a lot of the labor market dynamics we focus on. So this is comparing job vacancies. We have a job vacancy survey that we conduct every year to see how many openings there are on average in the state. And then we compare that to the number of unemployed folks. So that's ostensibly job seekers. So that ratio gives us a good idea of the tightness or looseness of the labor market. So if those black dots are really high, like 8.2 in 2009, 2010, that meant that we had 8.2 job seekers for every job opening. So that was a very employer-friendly time in the labor market. We've since seen that ratio drop quite a bit to below 1, which meant more labor market tightness leading up to the pandemic, a slight bump during 2020, and then historical tightness where we had less than 0.5 job seekers for every opening. So quite tight. You have less than half a person for every job opening. We've seen that loosen up a little bit as a number of unemployed has grown and the number of job vacancies has shrunk, but it's still below 1, so there's still some tightness in the labor market despite evidence of loosening. This is just to show you an example of what quarterly census of employment and wages data can provide. So this is large industry sector, number of jobs, number of establishments, percent of jobs, how much in total payroll they pay, and then what the average annual wage is. These data are available down to really small geographies like cities and townships, and we produce them every quarter. So this is probably our most detailed wage and employment data for industry. Not probably, it is. So you can see, maybe you had an idea of which industry was the largest. Healthcare and social assistance has been the top one for quite a while now, statewide, followed by manufacturing and retail trade. 39% of jobs in the state are in just those 3 sectors. And how have those sectors fared over time? Half of those sectors have more jobs now than they did 5-6 years ago. The fastest growing until, well, there have been mining layoffs, but until those mining layoffs, mining was the fastest growing relatively, as well as construction, public administrations, that's government, and healthcare and social assistance. Opposite end, fastest declining is administrative support and waste management services. That's a lot of temp jobs, and temp work is in there. Information has been long-term decline, and then finance and insurance. But more positively, we saw 13 sectors, so it's more, there's 20 sectors, 13 of them added jobs over the year. Okay, I'm gonna pause there again. Any questions on labor market update? Next, we're going to jump into the actual demonstration of the tools. And these data are, depending on the source, available for your region as well, wherever you are in the state. So if you want more specific data, be that labor force, unemployment, jobs, etc., we can provide that. Just get in touch with your regional analyst. Okay, so now the fun part. We're gonna look at the tools. I'm gonna be putting some links in the chat so you can follow along if you want to. So the first thing we'll do is take a peek at our data tools page. There we go. Okay, so you can access our tools here. This is where we have the 24 or so data tools. And you can get there a couple different ways. You can either web search MND data tools. You can navigate to the link I just sent there, which sends you to the data tool page, or through the DEED homepage. Or if you know the name or acronym for the specific tool, you can do that as well. Just throw in like MND ahead of it to get our version of it, because each state has their own version of, say, QCW or LA, US, Laos. Okay. Some tips and tricks for navigating our website. Most of our tool pages will have a similar format. So show you real quick. This is our data tools page. Across the top, you'll have the ribbon for the DEED website. Most of our stuff is available here via data, so you can get to all of our publications, research, data tools this way. Or on the data tools page or any individual data tool page, you've got this gray bar on the left, and that can show you all the different data tools, and you can navigate that as well. The menu here table shows you the tools with a link to them, as well as a little more information on what it offers and the type of data available. Keep an eye out for that navigation bar. So say we go to career pathways, which is one of the tools we're going to look at today. You'll see, again, that gray navigation bar on the left. The data tool itself will either be a visualization like this in the example of career pathways, or let's say we're looking at occupations in demand, which is another one we'll look at, or you'll see this gray tool or a little link like I have circled on the page there on the page here, you'll see that. So it's either that pill or the little data tool link that'll get you to the actual data tool. And you can always return to data home, which will get you back to the data tools page, or the tool name home, which will get you back to the landing page for that specific tool. Okay, again, back to that perspective of job seekers. We're going to start from there. So when I talk with high school students, high school classes, career exploration classes, we often start here, and you've got this option, these options ahead of you. You finish high school. The simplified choice is either work now or work later. Work now means you enter the labor force or the workforce. You go get a job right away. The other option, work later, is you go get some additional training or education, 2-year, 4-year, etc. Of course, you can work part-time or along with doing that. So that's why the choice is simplified. There's some other examples like apprenticeships or armed forces that kind of are both end. But I just put it out there as there are choices to be made, and LMI can help answer those questions that you have. So work now, career exploration is kind of the top of mind option. So you want to explore those different careers and compare. For that, use occupations in demand / career pathways is the tool, or the tools probably best suited to answer those type of initial questions when you're career exploring. And then work later, those tools also super handy because you want to have an endpoint in mind. So you still want to explore those careers, and then you can explore what does it take to get there if it requires some additional education or training. And then comes in graduate employment outcomes. So graduate employment outcomes, or GEO, is a super powerful tool that we have a bunch of spin-off tools from that we're going to highlight today. And it can tell you based off of the major you chose, an institution or type of institution, here's how many graduates are employed, what industry are they most likely to be in, what region of the state are they employed in, 2 years plus years, and what wages are they earning. Starting with occupations in demand, it's a relative ranking of occupational demand by planning region and state. So you can get localized lists for your area or region. It offers the demand ranking. So we have a 5-star system, 1 being the least demand, 5 being the highest. Basically say if it's 3, 4, or 5 stars, we consider that to be above average demand. We create this measure of demand from job vacancy survey, another one of our tools, unemployment insurance claims. So if there's a lot of unemployment insurance claims in a given occupation or industry, demand for that position or that occupation or industry is probably lower. And then occupational employment. If there's a lot of jobs in a given occupation, just through turnover, you're going to have higher demand. So even if, for example, you see in this table on the screen, retail salespersons, number 2 in demand in Minnesota, it's expected to decline slightly over 10 years. That's what this right here is showing. 10-year growth rate. It's projected to decline. Well, how can it be in such high demand? It's because we have it's such a big occupation that just through turnover, you're going to get a lot of demand. There's a question in the chat, how frequently is this tool and others updated? Depends on the tool. Occupations in demand is updated every year because we wait for each of the other sources to be updated, which are updated usually once a year as well. In the case of occupational employment and job vacancy survey, so we wait and then we update it typically in the early fall. And then in addition to that, we have some wage data, educational requirements, and then on the job training requirements if there are some. The educational requirements, point out there, you'll notice that they look like they're links. So if let's say you're interested in registered nurses and you want to know what are those educational options available to you, you click on that associate degree link there, and you get the schools and programs available for that specific program that are training folks to get to that occupation. So these are the registered nursing programs, or at least the sampling of them in the area that you chose. This is statewide, so you'll get the full list. And then it gives you, the zip code and title, classification of instructional program, SIP, school name, location, program title. Each school will call it probably something a little bit different. The award that's offered, so that's a degree or certificate, and then how long it takes. So that could be helpful as well as like an initial comparison on how you get to a specific occupation or the options available there. Next, I want to highlight our employment projections. We call it Employment Outlook. So we offer employment projections by occupation and industry, very detailed occupational and industry employment projections, 10 years. So that's our long-term projection program. And then 2 years is our short-term. The long-term projections we offer for all those 6 planning regions, so Northeast Minnesota, Northwest, Southwest, Southeast, Central, and the Twin Cities Metro, as well as statewide. And, excuse me, we produce the 10-year every 2 years, and we produce the 2-year every year. And again, those are only statewide, those short term. You can see a table there that's an example from the website. We could do a lot of other things with these projections. They're great estimations of future demand. And this is what industry projections look like statewide in terms of projected percent growth. So you can see the ones at the top that were expected to grow the fastest: professional, scientific, and technical, arts, entertainment, and recreation. And then toward the bottom, the ones we expect to either decline or grow the slowest: retail, trade, self-employment, and utilities, and government being at the bottom. By detailed occupation, these are the fastest growing occupations in Minnesota over those 10-year periods with over 500 jobs, so larger occupations. One thing you might notice if you look at the typical education required there, almost all of them require, of these fastest growing ones, require some sort of 4-year plus education. There's a few associated in there and post-secondary non-degree, which is like vocational training. But nurse practitioners, data scientists, statisticians, information security analysts, PAs, a lot of these are pretty high educational requirement occupations. And then lastly, just in terms of number of openings, this is where I talk with a lot of job counselors. So you may look at an occupation and say like, oh, the percent growth is only, 1% or below 5%, which is kind of the key threshold. There are other ways to measure demand. So if you have an occupation that's pretty large, let's say you have a client that's interested in, being a office clerk, but the growth doesn't look great because there's a lot of automation in those types of settings. That is definitely a factor. You look here, you still have the green bar represents the number of replacement needs, so replacement openings as people leave and go to other occupations or leave the labor market. There's still going to be an estimated like 35,000 openings over 10 years. So there's still a lot of actual absolute demand. And you can make the case in a lot of these occupations that way as well, if the occupation is large. All right, putting together those educational requirements by occupation, occupational employment and wage statistics, OEWS, occupations and demand, which we just talked about, and projections, as well as the Career Force website, and you get career pathways. This is the tool that I market to most job explorers, or career explorers. I like it because it's very visually appealing and it's interactive, whereas a lot of our tools can seem a little dated. They have there's kind of like a table of data, which especially for young people is just not very engaging. You need to have interaction, colors that needs to be easy to follow. And I think this Career Pathways tool, which my colleague in Central Minnesota, Luke Greiner, created, really does a good job of bringing together a bunch of information, but not overwhelming the user and engaging the user a little bit better than some of our other tools. So I really like it. And I think especially for high school students, it's like a great intro to career exploration. We have all of those demand rankings, a lot of the OID, occupations in demand, layout and structure. So all that information is pulled in. Expected growth, so you can see if this occupation is expected to grow or decline over the next 10 years. Those educational requirements, which is super important, so you know what's required to get into an occupation typically. And then an added feature is links to career force detailed occupation pages. And those are great because they offer videos of a specific occupation. It's like a day in the life of an occupation. So I'm going to throw this into the chat real quick because I'm going to okay. Open it up. This is what the tool looks like. So you can navigate to any of the regions. I'm up in Northeast Minnesota, so I'll choose Northeast Minnesota. And you've got your ranking by demand, your occupational title, the typical education requirements, and then over here, the length of the bar represents the number of actual jobs in that region, in that occupation. If you hover over the bar, it gives you more detail. So if you're familiar with the career cluster and pathways organization or structure, we have that as well. So the career cluster are those buttons across the top. So health science for home health and personal care aides. You can hover over these. These are each of those clusters, and you can also click on them to filter. So if we just wanted those health science occupations in that health science cluster, we can filter that way. The number of jobs, the level of demand, so 50% of jobs pay between 31,000 and 37,000 for this occupation in that region. That's super handy. So you can get like an idea of the typical wage range. Sometimes a median is a little too specific for folks. And then projected growth. So how many openings are we expecting and what's the percent growth? 10.7% is almost triple what the average expected growth rate for all occupations in Northeast Minnesota. So that's expected to grow very quickly. And then if you are like, okay, that intrigues me a little bit more, I want to learn more, you click on the occupation and it takes you to the detailed occupation page, which has a lot of the same LMI data down here that we just talked about, but it has that video so you can watch a video and see exactly what personal care aides do in a day. So super handy for career exploration. Pretty intuitive, I think. You can also filter by typical education. So if you either already have a certain education or you have one in mind that you are aiming for, you can filter that way as well. And you can also search for an occupation. So let's say you're looking for welders. Do that. And you can filter that way as well. Any questions on career pathways before I move on? Great. Okay, we'll keep going. Still plenty to cover. Stuck. Okay, so that was the job seeker perspective, a career explorer perspective. What if you're coming from an institution, business, a post-secondary institution perspective? Some other ways you can use LMI, you can do that supply and demand analysis. So let's say you're in workforce development, you're trying to work between educational institutions or the pipeline of talent, how we're producing talent locally, and then you're also working with employers locally that have certain needs at their businesses. How do you connect those two? That's kind of the big question that can be answered using LMI, or at least you can get closer to that answer using LMI. So strategic planning for workforce development boards, employers, and educational institutions. Ideally, they're all operating on the same set of facts. LMI can bring them to the table and get them kind of on the same page. This table here is just an example of some of that workforce alignment analysis I've done for Northeast Minnesota based off of our educational, post-secondary educational institutions here. Natalie asked a question in the chat, what percent is considered a low high growth rate? I say it's relative to your area. So what we offer in our employment projections is total all occupations or industry growth for that region. So for Northeast Minnesota, I believe it's 3.1% from 2022 to 2032. Statewide is higher, somewhere closer to 5%. So a lot of times job counselors will see, that the growth rate is not 5% for an occupation in Northeast Minnesota, but on average, our growth rate is less than that. So we're kind of at a disadvantage if the hard and fast rule is 5%. So I say, go off of the average of the local area that you're looking at. And then if that also can't get you to where you need to get, look at the number of openings that are going to be projected, because that could be large enough to justify this person going into a specific training program, et cetera. So I guess long answer short is it depends on what you're looking at in terms of your geography and your occupational group industry. Okay, so labor supply and demand, it's kind of what we boil it down to. Are people graduating, getting trained, et cetera, to fill positions that are in demand? If our workforce and educational systems are working well together, the answer to that is yes. So some things that you can use, or some data sources we can use to measure these different sides of that workforce development coin. You've got supply statewide longitudinal educational data system, just SLEDS for short. In the same vein, you've got our graduate employment outcomes, which is GEO, and then the National Center for Education Statistics and IPEDS, an integrated post-secondary educational data system. Different ways to measure graduation, completions, enrollment, et cetera. And then demand, coming from the other side, you've got our occupations in demand, which we talked about, how that's measuring demand. Educational requirements for occupations, so that's what type of education typically is required for those occupations, and then employment outlook, the projections we spoke of. Okay, so SLEDS. SLEDS is a really powerful data source, and it connects K through 12 to post-secondary and workforce and beyond. So we can track students through school, and there's a lot of measurements within school that are tracked through SLEDS that I don't work with as much, but once they finish high school and then they either go into the workforce or enroll in post-secondary, I'm more familiar and use SLEDS more for that. So that's what I'm going to focus on today. So you can answer questions like how students are faring in school, but then what do students do? Where do they go after graduating? So here's a screenshot from SLEDS. This is looking at Hibbing Public School District, graduates of 2023. So you're comparing Hibbing here to statewide numbers, and this is the blue share of graduates that went to post-secondary or college the next fall. So that was 55% that went somewhere in Minnesota from Hibbing, compared to 42% statewide. And you can see it's pretty comparable in the overall share that graduated and went. So it's 64% for Hibbing and about 62% for statewide in terms of students that graduated from high school and then enrolled in post-secondary. And you can compare that over time. So that's 2023. You go back to 2013, about 85% of Hibbing grads enrolled in post-secondary. So you can see, that's the trend we've seen over the longer term, is kind of decreased enrollment. Same thing statewide, a little bit under 75%, and that has decreased over the last decade. You can also see what they've done if they've decided to go into the workforce as well. So you can compare that to enrollment. So 41% of Grand Rapids Public School District graduates, so switching the area a little bit, just went right into the workforce after graduating high school, so that fall. And you can see how that compares again to 10 years ago. That share has grown. So that makes sense. Enrollment post-secondary has decreased. Those entering the workforce immediately has increased. All right. I want to show SLEDS real quick. Feel free to throw any questions into the chat while I pull it up. And I'll make sure to send out all these links to as part of the follow-up email at the end. Right. This is what the landing page looks like. You've got it broken down by high school graduates and college students and adult education. You can see outcomes for kind of the 3 different categories. I use sleds a lot for the high school component. So where are high school graduates going? How are they faring? So I look at this enrollment one here and this entering the workforce, and I'll note that there are a bunch of resources tied to sleds. So there are sleds analysts that are the experts for sleds for specific regions. So feel free to check out these tabs here to see who your local contact is. So just as an example, enrollment, the things that you can look at, so you can look at specific districts or schools, year. You can filter by race, ethnicity, gender, other criteria. So if you want to see how a specific subset of the student body is faring or what the outcomes are, you can do that. You can see where they go to school by school type. So, Minnesota public 2-year, 4-year, etc. You can see how many credits were taken and by term. You can see the top 25 colleges attended. This one is always really fascinating to people. So you can see based off of a school district, how many stay local, how many go to a 2-year, how many go to a 4-year. People are often really interested in this. Minnesota, University of Minnesota Twin Cities is the highest for Minnesota grads of 2023. Probably no surprise. And then some time trends. So you can see how long it takes folks to graduate or how long it takes them to enroll. And then you got more options here. You can download all of the data if you want to play with it yourselves too. It's a pretty big file, but very detailed. And then briefly entering the workforce. This gives you kind of that other side, hours and wages. So you can see the overall share that decided to go to work versus enroll in college versus unknown. If they left the state or they're not working or enrolled, they won't show up in these data. So that's often what the unknown is representing. So it's just within Minnesota state. We do track if they're enrolled outside of the US, outside of Minnesota, but not if they're employed outside of Minnesota. So you get the typical wage, what share employed 20 hours less. Perhaps not surprising that the bulk are all part-time, 20 hours or less. And then you can see the breakdown by industry. Leisure and hospitality and trade, transportation, and utilities are the top 2 in terms of the share of recent grads. So that's also important for folks to know. All right, so that was sleds. Moving right along, we're getting into GEO. So graduate employment outcomes is kind of the post-secondary version of sleds, where sleds is like focusing on K through 12. GEO focuses on that post-secondary outcome component. And it's a super powerful and broad tool. So it covers both employment and wage outcomes, and it provides those outcomes in detail down to the individual institution, down to the individual program, by award, by degree, degree type, and by year, by graduation cohort. So there's a lot of data available there. And just recently, we've started to try and, because it can be overwhelming, to break out those data into specific tools that focus on different components of what GEO offers. So, is there a question? Okay, so graduate employment outcomes, this is what the tool looks like itself. So you can, this is looking at Lake Superior College, for all programs, graduates of the 2015 to 2016 cohort, and these are the detailed codes, and this is for all awards. So, associate and certificates is what is offered at Lake Superior College. And you've got the SIP codes, which is again, classification of instructional programs. So that's how we code the basically majors. And And then the title for that, a lot of times this title won't necessarily line up with what the school calls it, but by classifying it under this code, that's how we know that they're doing this specific thing that compares with this specific program in another institution. Number of graduates, importantly, the number of employed graduates with reported wages in Minnesota. So just like SLEDs, if a graduate moves out of state and works out of state, these data won't track them. So that's an important caveat to know, but if it's really good for capturing folks that study in Minnesota and then are employed subsequently in Minnesota. The annual median wage 2 years after graduation. So we wait 2 years to allow basically for some settling of the graduating cohort. If you do it just a year after, you get a lot of noise in the data, so 2 years is what we go for. The percent that are employed full-time, the percent that are working part-time, and then 3 years after graduation, some of the same data. So percent working full-time, annual median wage, and then again at 4 years after, percent working full-time and annual median wage. So ideally what you see is that, you know, for a program, it goes up. The more you're in the career, the further after graduation you are. Employment status is another component that we show. So percent of graduates with reported wages in Minnesota. So basically what share are graduating and then opting to work in Minnesota or able to work in Minnesota 2 years after graduation. And then what share is not found in wage records, because that's how we connect post-secondary graduation and student records to wage records. So that's how we connect these two things to find these outcomes. And then employment outcome, not known. So this second one here is for folks that are continuing education. So, you know, 5.9%, for example, of clinical medical laboratory science research. And a lot of times for these more advanced like scientific programs, they may be going on to get a further degree. So maybe they're going to get a bachelor's or pursuing a master's, PhD, et cetera. So that's why you'll see a higher share there. Same thing with nursing. And then this outcome unknown, they're either employed outside of the state or we don't have wage records available for them. Okay, so graduate employment outcomes itself, you can go into that tool and play around with it. It's great, but again, can be a little overwhelming. So our researcher, Alessia Liebert, created GEO in the first place and now has started to pull out specific ways of looking at these outcomes data and creating more user-friendly, more engaging dashboards to look at subsets of the data. So one of those is the graduate earnings and cost calculator. So this focuses on kind of the earnings outcomes by those instructional programs by post-secondary institution. So 3 big questions that you can answer with this tool. Are expected earnings post-graduation enough to cover both the cost of living, so factoring in the typical cost of living for the area you're in Minnesota, of a standard and of a standard student loan. So you can put in how much you expect to take out in terms of loans or how much you have and put that into the tool, and it adjusts that orange line there. And you could see in the bottom here, net earnings. You want your net earnings to be positive, right? So you factor in all these other costs because your median wage coming out is just one variable or one factor to consider. The others are like, what's your quality of life that you want, where are you living, how that impacts cost of living, etc. Second question is, which majors lead to higher earnings and how fast do those earnings grow? So some majors or some programs, you get out and you have relatively low wages, but you get some other sort of training that you add to it. So I think about engineering. So if you look at some of the engineering outcomes, 2 years post-graduation of, say, an associate degree in engineering technology, it's quite low median wages, but that's because a lot of those graduates go on to get a bachelor's and then get their professional engineering certification or license, and then you see the income jump up a bunch. The same thing you can see in medicine. So, residency, you've got lower wages for those in medical school, but after residency, so we're talking 5-6 years post graduation of the medicine program in these data, then you see wage outcomes jump a lot. So it depends on where you look post graduation to see what kind of wages you get. So that's what this chart is showing. So for example, orange here, registered nursing, starts out relatively high and stays high. One that grows from below what was considered the living wage in Minnesota to above it is culinary arts. So 1 year post-graduation, below, you get more experience and it rises up to above. So you can compare that by region of schooling, the credential level. You can compare it different majors here. So, and you can also compare it by age. So some of these, for example, let's say we're looking at a Master's of Business Administration. That's typically a degree or an award that folks go back and get kind of mid-career. So if you look at the younger than 26, you'll get a very different outcome than if you look at all ages for MBAs. And then the third question that you can address with this is, how do earnings vary by type of school with the same major? So this is important for somebody that's considering different schools and the different costs associated with them. So you can compare the outcomes in terms of wages as well as another variable in that consideration. So for example, here you've got accounting, criminal justice, engineering and graphic design by different types of school. So Minnesota State Universities, private for-profit, private not-for-profit, and University of Minnesota. And you can see how many graduates are employed 5 years after, and then what their median annual wage is 5 years after as well for those credential, school type, and major. So that's another important factor to consider. And you can also, you look at all the different ways. You can, again, you can look at it by age, by region. You can filter on the school type. You can filter on the credential level. And then you've got all the majors here available to compare as well. All right, I want to show you this real quick in action because I think this is a really powerful tool. Throw the link in the chat and feel free to ask any questions while I go through this. So for this first tab, the cost calculator tab, I found it pretty interesting to, so let's say you don't really know what you want to look at because there's a lot of majors here, right? But a kind of a fun way, it says suggested up to 10, but what you can do is you can click all here and you get all of the programs for the selected fields you have. So let's say you just want to look at all of them in engineering. Only 2 there. You can compare those and you can see the title of them down here. So this is software engineering and this is pre-engineering and this is an associate degree. You can filter on school location. So let's say you just want to look at schools in Northeast Minnesota. Only pre-engineering is offering schools there. Let's say I want to add in construction trades just to give a little variety. Electrician, associate. The typical cumulative debt for programs in your selection. So this is associate degrees. This is like average associate degree debt. You can take this and put it in here if you want to get an idea of what the typical person pays. And then this is your typical loan cost based off a 10-year repayment plan. It's like a typical repayment plan with 5.05 interest. So that's how much you're adding to your cost of living. So I don't know if you noticed when I did that, but you see the line move. This goes up, this goes down a little bit down here. So let's say I'm borrowing a lot more than average. So 40. You'll see this drop down because that's being taken out of your expected earnings. So this is your net that you're kind of expecting to get above the typical living wage plus the debt that you anticipate. So pretty cool And then if you want to hone your cost of living down to your specific region, you can do that too. So this is statewide right now. Let's say you want to live in Northeast Minnesota. Hey, your net earnings just went up because the cost of living in Northeast Minnesota is a little cheaper than it is in statewide. So another thing that you can factor into your consideration, just a super powerful, useful tool. On that second tab, this is earnings over time. So you may look 1 to 2 years post-graduation and say, I don't know, it's not really what I expected to make or what I need. So maybe I'm not as interested in this occupation, but we recommend you get kind of the full longitudinal look at wages to get the best idea of how things are going to fare. So let's see, this is again associate. I'm going to go to doctoral and professional and health professions, show you that medicine and dentistry. They still start above the living wage, but the growth is pretty noticeable from 1 to 6 years post-graduation. You're almost doubling your wage. That's what I meant by the wage can change quite a bit depending on how far out from graduation you are. And then by school type, we're in Northeast Minnesota, so I'll filter by the region. I'm going to look, I want to know, let's say I'm about to be a recent graduate, so I'm interested in how my peers are faring. And Minnesota State Colleges, we've got some of those, so I want to make sure those are included. And the credential level, bachelor's, and I went and got computer and information science. So I'm interested on how those folks are faring. So I've got my bachelor, the 2 different types, private not-for-profit and University of Minnesota. So that'd be University of Minnesota Duluth specifically. And you've got the majors that are available there that have enough folks employed 5 years later. And you can see the median wages here. So pretty good for those that graduated in the 2016 and 2019 range. And then you can see what share of grads are working full-time year-round by hovering over here as well. Right. Any questions on the graduate earnings and cost calculator? Keep going. All right, so college major to career connector. So let's say you're not quite to that point where you know which major you want to pick. This tool focuses on that connection issue. So you have either you have a career in mind and you want to know which programs get you there, which majors get you there, or you're in a major and you want to know what it prepares you for. That's what this tool can do. So you can do it from either direction. So there's 2 tabs to either go from career to majors or from majors to career. So this first one here is the careers to majors. So you select your career group and you select your career occupation, and those get listed here. And then it lists the majors that are designed to prepare you for that career, in addition to median wages for those majors. So basically people that took this carpenter program, and then this is what their median wage is 5 years post-graduation, and then the number of graduates in Minnesota with that major 2017 to 2020. And this is the other direction. So you start with the major, say machine shop technology assistant, and then you've got all of the occupations that that major ostensibly prepares you for. And this is done through what is called the SIP-SOC crosswalk. So it connects occupational data to classification of instructional program data. So it's based off of those connections. So that's how we're getting these connections here. And then you can see the bar is the number of jobs. So machinist is the biggest occupation here. So if you're taking this machine shop technology assistant program, odds are probably best for you to end up as a machinist. That seems like where a lot of the folks end up employed. And then in addition to that, it also pays the highest median wages of all of these other occupations that you could go into by taking that program. Throw that into the chat so you can toy with it, but I don't think I have necessarily to cover it. Okay. Well, it looks like. All right, next tool. This is similar to that one, but it's college major to industry of employment. So if you know of an industry, you want to work in a specific industry because you like it or you know it has good prospects, you looked at the employment projections and you see that professional, scientific, and technical services is expected to grow 10% over the next 10 years. So you're like, okay, I'll work backwards to a career that is, primed to get into that industry. This tool can help you with that. A lot of the same types of filters available here as in the previous tool. You can filter by degree, by major, field of study. And then what it does is, let's say you've selected chemical engineering, you get total industries, so that's the median wage for all people that have studied chemical engineering. And then you can see the different industries that those graduates have gone into. Manufacturing being the top one, 48% of chemical engineering graduates end up in manufacturing in Minnesota. And then you can see the median wage is $39.36, about the same as the median wage for all graduates there. However, if you manage to get into the firm headquarters industry, your wage premium is about $8 more. That's more so like, you're in management of some sort. And you can see professional assigned and technical services, about the same, and wholesale trade. And a small share end up in education. So maybe you studied chemical engineering and then you go back and teach chemical engineering or science of some sort. And you can do that for any different majors. This one in there too. This is briefly what it looks like. So say architecture and related services, total all education, say the different fields of study or programs that are available in that field of study, and then the different majors as part of that. So you've got your major, architecture. Most of these are pretty refined, right? Like if you go into architectural and building sciences, your best odds are that you'll end up in professional and scientific technical services. It's kind of the same for all these. A lot of architecture engineering is in professional and scientific technical services. Architecture general, you have a little bit more options, manufacturing, construction as well. Okay, take a little break here for some more questions. If anybody has them, a chance to take a sip of water. All right, we soldier on. The high school technical education pathways and outcomes is exciting. So this is career and technical education focused. It's basically like GEO and SLEDs, but focused on career and technical education outcomes. So students that took, let's see, 100 total hours of instruction in CTE with minimum of 58 in one CTE topic. So questions that you can answer here, you can see this like a similar chart here to GEO in terms of wage outcomes over time post-graduation. So employment and wage outcomes for CTE participants in the same vein as GEO. Which CTE pathways lead to higher wages? It's a big question you can ask. Second one is, how do educational attainment pathways vary by program? So similarly to GEO, you can see the detailed course topic. So that is the first column there. What's your median wage? And it's based off of whether you did not pursue post-secondary, you're in the midst of post-secondary, so you're in it but you haven't completed, credential below bachelor's at any point, and then a bachelor's or above. So if you're in construction, it's kind of interesting to point out that like you can make, you tend to make more if you're in the like credential below bachelor's. A lot of those construction trades have vocational training or apprenticeships that would count as below bachelor's credential, and that makes a few dollars higher on average than those that pursued other types of post-secondary or not post-secondary. And you can kind of see that trend through these different construction topics of CTE. So they're supplementing a little their CTE a little bit, but they're not pursuing necessarily a bachelor's in these topics or similar topics. And then which industries? So in the same way as that last geo tool, what industries are the CTE participants ending up in? So if they studied or took classes in carpentry and furniture production, you get a pretty wide array of industries, right? Because somebody that necessarily is taking a CTE class in high school, that doesn't necessarily mean that that is their field of choice for their career. So you've got a pretty big array there, but it does indicate some interest in that field. And as a result, 20% of those that took, a significant number of hours in that topic, 20% of them ended up in construction and were making $28.83 a few years after graduation. So pretty positive outcomes, and might be a good advertisement for CTE and how it really does connect folks to specific fields. Same thing with electricity and plumbing. The top one is construction and manufacturing, and they both pay over $24 an hour in median wage. And down here, maybe a little weaker connection in electricity and wiring, where the top one is retail, but then you have construction and manufacturing, which are about the same amount of percentage of participants. This one in there. And another thing I'll add is each of these tools has great tutorials with them. And Alessia, who created these tools and manages these data, also wrote several articles. So if you really want to dive in and see the trends kind of statewide that have come from looking at these data in these specific ways, she does a really good job of doing that, and those articles are available on our website as well. The last tab here on the CTE Pathways and Outcomes tool, I love a good scatter chart. So let's say you want to just kind of see the total number of working versus the median wage. So you want to take a CTE class that has, a lot of people working in it and a relatively high wage. You can do that here and compare a bunch at the same time. So this little brown dot here, it's got about 1,500 that participated in that course topic, vehicle repair, and the annual median wage 5 years post high school is between 40 and 42K a year, which is, it looks like in the top 10 of CTE programs. Up here is electricity and wiring, but under 50 took that statewide, or sorry, in the metro. So this is also a super handy, quick way to compare a bunch of CTE topics and the wage and employment outcomes from them. You want to be the right and up, ideally. All right, just a few more things to touch on, and then we'll have some questions. I mentioned the National Center for Education Statistics as part of the Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System, or IPEDS. This is where you can get, it's basically a clearinghouse for all post-secondary information. We get information via Minnesota Department of Education as well, but this is a great place. Say you wanted to look at some other schools outside of Minnesota. You can pull and detailed enrollment data, and it's all in the same format too. So you can get a really good information. I focus on institutional characteristics, so like how many folks are enrolled, what does the student body look like, but then outcomes, so graduation rates, and then really important for me is completions, because completions get tied to those programs of study and institution and award level, but they also provide information by race, ethnicity, gender, by year. So you can see the longitudinal outcomes, how they change, and then I combine that with DEED, occupational demand and projection data to get at that workforce alignment. So how does that supply and demand match up for a specific area? So NCES is good. One thing I'll say though is that I don't know if it will continue to be updated, just given the staffing changes at the federal level. I've heard that NCES has been definitely impacted by that. So NCES may not be updating their data as timely as they have in the past, just as a heads up. So this is an example of how I've used all these data, kind of put it together, doing what I call workforce alignment. So this comes out of a request through the Workforce Development Board here in Northeast Minnesota, trying to get can we assess how our students and our talent pipelines are aligning with the demand that our employers are saying. So what are the data available to measure that? We talked about the supply and demand. We've covered a lot of the tools that offer ways to measure the supply and demand. So on the demand side, you've got those occupations that typically require post-secondary education. So that can be, certificate up to PhD, but some sort of post-secondary education. That's in occupations in demand. So then what are the top 100 occupations in demand that require some post-secondary? And then what are the number of projected openings from those 100 occupations in demand? So that's our demand, that's our measure of demand. And then supply is from NCES. It is the number of completions by detailed post-secondary program, so zip code for those institutions within our region. There's some assumptions there, right? Like people moving in and out of regions, but with the people that we are producing from our post-secondary institutions in Northeast Minnesota, are we meeting like the bare minimum of demand via that, or maybe plus a little of people migrating in? That's the question. And again, we use the SIPSOC crosswalk to do that. The big caveat with the SIPSOC crosswalk is that it is not based off of empirical data, which really led me to the question of like, okay, well, how's it created in the first place then? But this was an opportunity for me to actually employ artificial intelligence to do some text similarity matching to compare occupational tasks, abilities, and descriptions to zip code, so program detailed descriptions, to see if we could kind of improve the SIPSOC matching process. So I've been working on that as well. And you put together and you get total number of completions by institution and job title. So job title connecting to different programs. So this is just a table that shows, by those occupations in demand, how many, if any, graduates are we producing that could potentially go into that occupation. We know that people don't necessarily go into an occupation just because it matches in the SIPSOC match, but they're more likely to because they have the skills and experiences. All right, one last tool I just want to mention is the Career and Education Explorer. This is similar to the Career Pathways tool that I mentioned, but I think it's geared more towards the workforce development set. So if you're a job counselor, a lot of folks will use Career and Education Explorer. I will say that it's under like reconstruction. So we're in the process of revamping it, trying to make it more user-friendly. But the big thing that this offers that is super handy is what we call the eligible training provider list. So that's a federally mandated list of all of the training and educational programs in the state, especially the ones that are WIOA certified. So meet the requirements within the workforce development system, so that if a job seeker comes in and they want to get retrained, that program needs to be WIOA certified in order for them to be able to enroll in that. So that is in the eligible training provider list, but you can also get all of that LMI related to occupations as well. So you can either search from an educational direction, so which program, if you know the program type, or from the occupation direction, if you have an idea of the type of occupation you want, and you can do this by region, and then you can see all the educational options available to you in the region and compare them that way. So it's very handy for job counselors, I would say is probably the biggest user case. But I am also very happy to help folks kind of work through Urban Education Explorer. It's just a handy place to get all the LMI data, especially with educational information in one place. And I spoke for almost an hour and a half straight and didn't cover probably 75% of the tools that we offer. So we have a bunch more information available on our website. I recommend you check it out. Here's just a list of a few more. I mentioned cost of living. Compare skills is a useful tool. Say you want to switch jobs, but you don't really know where to start. You put in your occupation that you have, and it gives you a list of the best matches for occupations using that skill set, and it kind of gives you an estimation of like the gap between certain skills as well. So maybe those are areas you can target for refinement. Unemployment insurance statistics, regional county profiles, that basically lists all of the most common LMI that people use by region and county. So it's a good place to start if you are like, I don't know the answer to this question. You go look at the data that are available, and if you still don't have the answer in there, then you reach out to me or my colleagues, and we can get you the answer, or tell you that the data may not exist in that format. But either way, we'll get you an answer. And then the research blogs, monthly highlights. There's so much more to explore on our website. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions. We've got about 8 minutes left. So I'll answer the questions that come up in the chat. But you can unmute yourself, raise your hand, and then unmute yourself if you have questions as well. Okay, great. And if you have to take off, thank you very much for attending. Hopefully you got some useful information here, and you can explore a little bit more. Here are the rest of the regional analysts too. Okay, so question here, the response participation of less educated, low-income families in survey data collection method might be low. I believe that this might bias the data outcome. Doesn't that affect the workforce resource allocation decision-making? What are your reflections, and what data analysis tools do you use? Yeah, great questions, Matthias. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Yeah, I think with any survey, yes, you're going to have some sort of bias in there. And is there a specific survey that you were thinking of when you asked that first part of your question? You can put it in the chat if not, and then I'll answer your second question while you're thinking about that. Data analysis tools. I will say that in my role as a regional analyst, most of what I'm doing is the type of information. So we have our researchers such as Alessia who did the analysis and the detailed research to produce those tools that I shared with you. She is a statistician, an economist. So she's doing the primary research on this. Mostly what I'm doing is I'm just packaging it in a way so that it can be easily understood and disseminated. So most of the analysis that I'm doing is not super deep. Like I'm not doing a lot of statistical analysis in the traditional sense, a lot of summary statistics stuff. So I use a lot of Excel, I use a lot of Tableau, and yeah, that's like most of my work. I would say probably like 90% of it is those tools. I'm not using like SAS or SPSS very, very often, if at all. Thanks for the questions. But yeah, I agree with your comment and the first part of your question. Any other questions? Show you while I'm, well, here we go. How to see what fields are experiencing layoffs more over month to spot trends. Yeah, so that is a perfect question for unemployment insurance statistics. our unemployment insurance statistics data. Pull it up here. Gives you month over month, but we also have week over week. So you can see it by occupational group and industry. So say, for example, you want to see in April, because unemployment claims are very seasonal, right? So if you look at construction, you'll see like huge jumps in the off season, so like the winter, but in the summer, hardly any. So if you're comparing, say, April to March, you'll see a huge decline, or if you're comparing December to November, you'll see a huge increase. So I like to compare like year to year within the same month, so you kind of limit out those seasonal trends. But to your question, this data source here would be the best to answer that. And I would say that it's also our best leading indicator. It gives you an idea of like what's coming potentially. But I will say, for example, mining layoffs are really a big deal here in Northeast Minnesota. Those haven't shown up in unemployment insurance statistics because those folks are still technically on payroll. Like they won't necessarily be officially laid off and collecting unemployment until the fall. So in that sense, it's not the best indicator, but we know those layoffs have occurred. It's just when they're actually going to come into effect and hit the unemployment insurance statistics system. Thank you for that question. Yes, Barb.
Carson, thank you. This has been really helpful. I think the I guess clarifying question I had is back to the supply and demand data that you showed us of how many graduates by region or statewide are coming out of our post-secondary schools versus the, in demand labor pool that's needed. Is there sort of a top 10 or top 20 list of programs needed where we're having to bring in workers in certain fields of study that we should be ramping up more programs of study in our state?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And that's the type of question that I'm hoping these type of data can answer. I haven't put them together in that specific way, but you definitely could.
Okay.
So if you want to connect afterward too, I could talk about kind of like how far I've made it in that analysis because it's ongoing. And yeah, we could definitely look at that.
So this chart that you're showing me right here again, this was for Northeast region, right?
Yep, that's correct.
And then the colors, what do they mean? Like, are they flagged for a reason or?
Yeah, so the colors here, a lot of times what you do is sometimes you'll get like, what you don't see here is the SIP program. And they're based off the SIP sock matching. A lot of times you'll get a lot of repeats. So like one SIP program will match to several occupations, or one occupation will match to several SIP codes, for example. So there's a many-to-many match. So those color coordinating were meant to highlight where there are some duplicates in terms of SIP sock matching.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
And I can pull this report myself and change up the regions if I want to. This is something I can play around with, or is it really a complicated one?
This is one that I have done kind of on my own. So this isn't like a statewide thing that has been done. This is me attempting to get at a question that was specific to Northeast Minnesota. I have produced this in years past for other economic development regions. So if you're in a north central, northwest economic development region, I might have an old version of this, but yeah, it would need to be updated.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. We are at time, so thank you very much for attending today. I will be following up with a link to the recording as well as links to all the tools that we talked about today. If you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, Carson.Gorecki at state.mn.us, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions, whether or not you reside or work in Northeast Minnesota. Our analysts are happy to help anybody in the state. And I really am passionate about LMI as it relates to workforce and education and training. So I look forward to continuing the conversation with you all. I hope you have great days. Thanks for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, the cat. Just want to make sure before I take off, does anybody have any more questions? All right, thank you so much.